Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to this session, this World Water Week session on Transboundary Cooperation for Resilient Basin Development. I hope you can stay with us for the almost 90 minutes that we have to discuss this topic. We have a great panel and a great set of speakers and some really interesting breakout groups. So we hope that you can join those and offer your thoughts, your experience, and also your challenges to those amongst the group facilitating and organizing this session. Unprecedented changes in our global climate system have led to, as we've seen over the summer, extremes from floods to fire to drought to competition elements, as well as we increasingly use water resources and we also abuse them. So the competition for those water resources becomes harder and more difficult to navigate and negotiate. This session explores some of the challenges within a transboundary context, yet we also see that this is an opportunity for collective action amongst technology providers, amongst communities, amongst politicians and at the political element of the transboundary extreme, and amongst finances. And so we want to use this session to really explore across borders and across and between sectors how transboundary cooperation can be used as a catalyst for resilient basin development. Now, next slide, please, Maria. I want to just run you through the agenda. We'll hear very briefly now from Belinda Petrie, the CEO of One World. And then we have two speakers from Africa, one coming from the Pungwe Save Transboundary Project shared between Mozambique and Zimbabwe, and the first one from the county member. He's the county member of the Executive Committee for the Environment, Water and Natural Resources in Kenya. Now, I'm not sure if our speakers have managed to make it, but we do have them pre-recorded for exactly this challenge of running sessions online. So you may just need to bear with us whilst we put those speakers online. We'll then hear some brief messages from Juan Carlos from GIZ about complementary elements that we've been sharing between our sessions over the course of the week. And then we'll go into the breakout groups, and each of those breakout groups is led by a facilitator and has a rapporteur in there so that we can really capture the conversation properly. And then that will come back for a reporting back session led by Jonathan Lautz of IMI, and closing of the session coming up to 90 minutes. So I should stop talking and hand over to Belinda. But before that, a few key messages that we shared at the beginning of this development of this session, really about exactly what we're looking for here and why we think transboundary cooperation is key for resilient basin development. I think there's three main elements. One is that we should use climate and the impacts of it as a real catalyst for investment in our transboundary basins. That we should also use this as an opportunity for improved data sharing because we need the data to understand the climate impacts. And from that data, identify risks associated with the impacts of climate change upon our systems. And finally, the multi-sectoral element of transboundary cooperation, working with different players in river basins who have different levels of impact and effect upon basins. And part of that for us as IUCN is really about incorporating nature-based solutions within a built solution environment for river basin development, but to also make sure that that's integrated around governance and stakeholders and finance. Now, I'd like to hand over to Belinda Petrie, the CEO of One World. Belinda, over to you.
Thank you, James, and welcome everyone to the session, which I've been looking forward to. It's long in the list of a number of sessions from the week, but I think a very interesting one to come to a close with on World Water Week. I'm going to take us through a very brief overview of how the climate crisis accelerates the impetus for strong transboundary governance and cooperation, and why we need to accelerate the pace of change. Next, please. Next slide, sorry. I'm going to start talking while we wait. I just thought to take us a little bit outside of the climate crisis and some of the key messages that James has just given to start with, to remind ourselves as to why transboundary river basins matter. And one of these reasons is that it is a bit of a numbers game. There are a large number of transboundary river basins, 276 across 148 countries. So almost all of our countries, more than half. I see there's an update to that. If I can qualify on that, it's 276 large or significant transboundary basins. It's not all of them, but that's across all 148 countries. So it's much more than half of the world's countries are sharing at least one river basin, sometimes more. The pressure on shared water resources is accelerating, unfortunately, at a much greater pace than our responses. And this is a function, we all know this, of population growth and urbanization, climate change and development. Climate change is accelerating the threat multiplier or the stress multiplier that water brings us, and kind of sits at the center of all of these issues. So transboundary basins really do matter, and therefore transboundary water governance matters. And this is because governance arrangements modify and regulate the way stakeholders interact with water and related ecosystems. So if we don't have that regulatory function, particularly in the face of climate change, we're in a bit of trouble. And I think part of the complexity is that governance happens both within and outside of a basin, and that's influenced by a range of factors, which ranges from information changes to ecosystem conditions and changes in the composition and needs of stakeholders. And of course, these changes all happen together or at different times, but they come together to coalesce with greater complexity. And then one of the biggest points that I really did want to make is that transboundary river basin governance, particularly because of climate change, is not transboundary if it's not inclusive, and that basin-wide cooperation is central and broad stakeholder engagement is pivotal to ownership of the solution. So water is the stress multiplier, and our belief is that adaptation to climate change pivots on better water resource development, with already significant water scarcity looming larger as a global crisis faces us increasingly because of climate change. If we can go to the next slide, I'm just going to start going into a little bit more of some of the detail around why climate change and transboundary water governance matters so much. To get to that point that James made, is that if we don't strengthen transboundary governance in the face of climate change, it makes it much harder for us to access climate finance and to mobilize financial resources. And this is not least because climate changes occur across borders. Somehow temperature rise and precipitation change don't seem to happen within country boundaries or even at a subnational level. And I think what's particularly interesting can be an opportunity, but it's also has serious implications, is that climate changes interact with every driver for cooperation. I may not have listed all the drivers here, just some of the key ones, not necessarily in order of preference. One being security at a human and a state level, with implications for human migration. This was a seminar that I ran in 2019 at World Water Week. It interacts with conflict. It can also be a foundation for peace agreements. The photograph on the right-hand side, compliments of Anders Jagerskoch, is of the Jordan Basin, which in a Middle East region is a great source of conflict in the Middle East. It's characterized by conflict and security issues, and yet the peace agreement between Jordan and Israel is founded on water sharing or water cooperation. So there are good news stories that we can learn from, and I always think that if it can happen in the Middle East, it can certainly happen almost anywhere else. One of the biggest issues around climate change is the loss of human development gains and increased poverty. So those development gains that we have made can and are being lost in the absence of responses to climate change. And this also brings about reduced prospects of regional integration, trade and stability. And obviously population growth, urbanization and development are among the key drivers that climate change also interacts with. And then I thought if we can go to the next slide, it might be useful to take this into a sort of perspective around how climate changes can cascade and do cascade through, in this case, a basin system. This is a model that we developed some time ago. And on the right-hand side is a very brief case study of what this means in West Africa, which was based on research around 22 transboundary river basins in that region, bearing in mind that Africa has a large number of the transboundary river basins in the world. But if you look at how climate changes cascade, you know, the first kind of order level, climate changes such as temperature increase, changes in rainfall variability, those things we can do very little about at a basin level because of global efforts that are not failing to address the pace of climate change through reducing emissions. Are the changes that can impact a basin, particularly temperature increase and rainfall variability, which are two of the key drivers in the West African basins I'm talking about. This in turn at a second order level brings about increased floods and droughts, amongst other extreme events in those basins, increased runoff, reduced groundwater recharge, so those biophysical impacts that can happen. And that then cascades through a system to bring about the third order level of change in terms of reduced surface and groundwater availability, so increased water scarcity, which is the story in the box on the right in the Sahel area in West Africa as a result of both temperature rise and lower rainfall. It can also damage infrastructure such as critical roads, access roads, bridges. So this reduces farmers' access to market. It can impact on school children getting to school, people getting to healthcare facilities, or just getting to work. Reduced agricultural productivity and tourism. We've been doing quite a lot of work around this in the Okavango River Basin in Southern Africa, where tourism is everything in terms of the Delta, for example. So this is, you know, it might look like some of these are national level implications, but actually they can be very much transboundary. And then at the fourth order level is where the rubber hits the road, and you really have to start thinking hard about what interventions, what are you mobilizing finance for? So this could be reduced water, it can be a combination of that and increased infrastructure replacement costs. It can be reduced livelihoods, which can be measured in terms of household incomes, reduced economic value from agriculture, tourism, etc., which can be measured in GDP. So you can start really bringing this home in terms of some hard-hitting facts and figures at a river basin level. So colleagues, my last message to you is that I get very excited and exercised by the opportunities and the challenges that come with addressing transboundary implications, not least because of the balancing act of sovereign interests versus basin level interests. But one thing I know for sure is that we need climate finance at a transboundary level. It is happening. It's happening, including in the West African region that I'm talking about and Southern Africa. To access that finance and to put the governance arrangements in place that the financiers need. We've got the Jeff on the meeting today. You need to show and demonstrate a level of transboundary governance, particularly in the face of climate change. James, thank you. I'll hand over back to you.
Great, thanks very much, Belinda, and some really important points there on this sort of hierarchy of impacts and the point and the opportunity this brings to us is in order to try and solve those challenges across borders. Excellent. So thanks very much, Belinda. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Isaac Lukwe from the Busia County member for Water and Natural Resources in Kenya. Isaac, can you hear us and are you there? Excellent. Thank you. Maria,
thank you.
Your slide.
Can you hear me?
We can, loud and clear. Please go ahead.
I want to present to you the work we are doing on climate change impacts in Sio Malaba Malaki Sub-Basin and management strategies. This sub-basin is within the Nile Basin and East Africa. The background to this is that this transboundary water course that is shared between Kenya and Uganda. and it has a population of about 4 million inhabitants. There are two catchments, one Malaba, Malakisi, and Implogoma catchment, which is about 3,782 square kilometers, with a source from Mount Elgon and drains into Lake Kyoga in Uganda. The second catchment is Sio, which is about 1,448 square kilometers, with the source from a swamp in Bungoma County in Kenya and drains into Lake Victoria. The main economic activity within this sub-basin is mainly subsistence farming, and the challenges in the sub-basin include climate change impacts such as flooding, hailstones, landslides, high poverty, population pressure, degradation of land and water resources. Next, please. The climate change impacts in the sub-basin result from deforestation of catchments, wetlands, and riverbank degradation. And this translates into a number of impacts on populations that are vulnerable to landslides and floods. The climate change impacts, such as floods and landslide events, are likely actually to increase in frequency and severity in future. And particularly in this basin, the impacts of these events have included loss of life, displacement of populations, waterborne diseases, loss of infrastructure and farmland, and increased transport of sediments, which have resulted into siltation of reservoirs downstream. Next, please. Strategies for addressing these impacts in the Sio Malaba Malaki sub-basin. The SMM Basin Investment Plan and Financial Sustainability Strategy has been developed and has the following objectives. One is support to identification and preparation of projects with the transboundary implications, support the prioritization and sequencing of projects in the sub-basin, to facilitate the mobilization of funding to implement projects within the sub-basin, then support the implementation of the projects in the sub-basin, and finally to ensure the financial sustainability of the investment program and the institutional framework of the sub-basin for the coordination of the management and development of the sub-basin. Next, please. The SMM has prioritized investment projects into 4 clusters, and there's an MOU which was initially signed, but it's being updated to capture the current issues. Using the IUCN benefit sharing tool, the stakeholders analyzed the 12 investment projects which have been shortlisted in the investment plan and arrived at 4 preferred clusters of projects that when implemented would actually address the climate change related problems and maximize benefits across the stakeholder groups between the 2 countries. These projects, when implemented, will each address a variety of stakeholder needs such as infrastructure development, catchment restoration, livelihood and enhancement, etc. And at this stage, I want to mention that already we are at an advanced stage with the Angololo Water Development Multipurpose Water Development Project. The stakeholder engagement is actually scheduled for next week to review the feasibility studies, and the CO Steko Wetland Conservation Investment Plan is also at an advanced stage. Now this, in addition, stakeholders have reviewed the existing MOU between Kenya and Uganda, which currently reflect NELSAP, that's the Nile Equatorial Lake Subsidiary Action Program-based institutional arrangements to reflect the establishment of a joint multi-level stakeholder inclusive basin management and development body. Now, the SMM MOU will soon be signed by the 2 parties, Kenya and Uganda, and has a total of 14 obligations for the parties, 2 of which are specifically addressing climate change, emergency, and disaster issues within the basin. And next, please. At that point, I wish to acknowledge the underlisted for the support they have actually provided in the course of our work within the sub-basin. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Isaac, for your presentation. and for giving us an update on where things are at with the SMM and the brief history of the challenges that you faced there and how you're solving them. We now like to go over to our next speaker as well, Elisha Madamombe. Elisha, if you're there, because we're having trouble tracking you down, please let us know. And if not, we will start a recording of your presentation. Okay, over to the recording.
And gentlemen, my name is Elisha Madamombe. I'm the Bupusa Regional Coordinator. I'm going to talk about the effects of climate change in Bupusa and the importance of funding water cooperation as a mitigation strategy. By Bupusa, I'm referring to Buzi, Pungwe, and Save shared river basins. These are river basins which are shared exclusively by Mozambique and Zimbabwe. All the three rivers start in Zimbabwe and flow through Mozambique into the Indian Ocean. The basins are a major source of water for agriculture, rural and urban water supply. In terms of climate change, it has been observed that there are changes in the spatial, temporal, and intensity of rainfall events leading to floods and droughts. It has also been observed that there is a decrease in food security and poor nutrition, especially in rural areas where subsistence farming is being practiced. Climate change is also exacerbating existing vulnerabilities such as poverty, poor health, and hamper progress towards sustainable development goals as set for 2030. Women and girls are the most affected during climatic shocks as they have to travel long distances to fetch water. It has also been observed that there is an increase in land and mudslides, which puts communities at risk. And also, it has been observed that climate change is contributing to rural-urban migration. Deforestation and land degradation leading to decrease in water quality as inhabitants look for alternative livelihoods is also on this slide. I'm just showing to you the impact of just one of the cyclones. This is the cyclone Idai, which took place in 2019. And what you see in the picture is the city of Beira, where almost 85% of the properties were actually affected during the cyclone Idai. On the left, this is typical of drought events experienced in Zimbabwe, and where women have to move long distances in order to fetch water. This slide also shows the mean annual rainfall variation. It can also be observed that there's quite high variability in terms of rainfall since 1900. But what has been observed in the last 30 years is there has been an increase in the extreme events in the Bupusa region. So, as Bupusa, what are the goals? Our goals are to drive cooperation and advise on transboundary issues, support member states on operationalization of water sharing agreements, drive development and implementation of the strategic plans, coordinate planning, development and management of the three shared river basins, promote sharing of data and information, facilitate stakeholder engagement, as well as mobilization of resources to support IWRM initiatives and to mitigate the effects of climate change. On this slide, I'm just showing you the roadmap that has been agreed by the government of Zimbabwe and the government of Mozambique, which consists of 4 components: the enabling environment, the stakeholder engagement, the water sharing agreements, and institutional developments. Ultimately, the two countries intend to establish a transboundary stakeholder forum, which will have an input in the management of the water resources in the 3 river basins. We also intend to finalize the water sharing agreements, as well as establish and operationalize the Bupusa Tri-Basin Institution. This is just showing our finance strategy. The idea is to start off as a project coordination tasks. This is what we're doing. Then move towards a permanent secretariat. And we start off by developing an interim finance strategy, but ultimately is to have a long-term sustainable finance strategy in place. And these are some of the partners we are working with. We are looking at the following activities: institutional strengthening on flood and drought, capacity building and transboundary e-flows, transboundary water sharing agreements, establishment of the Bupusa Tri-Basin Institution, transboundary diagnostic analysis leading to a strategic action plan, and resource mobilization for Bupusa strategies. And to the right, you see the partners we are working with. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, that was a great presentation from Alicia. Unfortunately, he can't be with us personally right now. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for that. I'm just waiting for the slide to come. Okay, here we go. So just to run you through the rest of this afternoon, we're now going to hear from Juan Carlos Sanchez from GIZ. He's going to give us an update on messages coming from the earlier GIZ-led session from earlier this week. Juan Carlos, over to you.
Yes, James, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. So as you just mentioned, we had on Monday, as part of the kickoff webinars of the World Water Week, one specifically looking at climate smart transboundary river basin development. Yes, it's a little bit of a mouthful, but it also represents part of the big challenges that we face here. The event was coordinated by the GIZ, by the German Development Corporation, together with the Nile Basin Initiative, the UNECE Secretariat, and of course, Wetlands International and the IUCN. Three key messages coming out from the webinar. All of them revolved around the key topics that we have heard from the previous speakers today: issues of governance and issues of access to climate finance. So in particular, we heard one of the key issues related to governance and policy, this issue of including climate change measures, whether they are nature-based solutions or issues of peatlands, mitigation, climate change action, etc., into policy instruments, whether they are management plans, transboundary agreements, conservation investment strategies. The key issue is to make sure that climate change features into these water policy transboundary instruments so that they can actually serve as a catalyst in the future for stakeholders on the ground to leverage funds for their implementation. So basically to show advancement and preparation for implementation of action on the ground. The second point that was highlighted by the presenters and during the discussions is the issue of stakeholder involvement. Yes, it's a topic that we know well, but still we have to make sure that as we recognize that river basin organizations have a key role to play in bringing issues of climate change into transboundary water management and water resources development, we cannot forget the non-state actors. So recognizing that state and non-state actors are critical, both not only for the planning stage, but also for implementation of successful transboundary water resources development. And finally, there was a call and the unanimity, I would say, from the discussions during the webinar on the issue of capacity building. Discussions were mainly around the topic of how to bring up to speed the water people and the water sector, including RBOs, into the preparation of bankable projects that then can, of course, go to leveraging funds for implementation and also for accessing and tapping into innovative climate finance instruments. So there seems to be a call from different regions. We heard from Latin America, we heard from Asia, and from African colleagues for this call on strengthening aspects related to capacity building. So those three aspects in a nutshell: governance, stakeholder participation, and the call for capacity building were the key issues coming from the webinar on Monday. And I believe that during the group work, we will have some more time to go into more of these issues. Thank you very much, James. Greetings from the Nile Basin, and back to you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Juan Carlos, for that. Governance, participation, and capacity building is three key findings from your earlier session. So we're now going to move over to the breakout groups. You will see on the screen, there are 4. Each is allocated a moderator. Thanks very much to Ali Davis from the US State Department, Astrid Hillers from GEF, John Matthews from AGWA, the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, and Chris Severin also from the GEF for taking on those roles. We have allocated everybody in the audience and those speakers to the different breakout groups so that you will all appear in one of those in a minute. You have 35 minutes to discuss the particular topic that's been allocated to each group. And we're giving you 35 minutes, not the full 40, just to make sure that we have a little bit of stretch of time and a bit of bandwidth in there. And 5 minutes before that time is up, you will receive a message to let you know that there are 5 minutes remaining and that you will need to then at that point, when the time is up, return back to the actual plenary room. And then we will go through the moderated report back from the groups. So over to you in the breakout groups, and good luck with your discussions and deliberations. Thank you very much. Excellent. Jonathan, I hope you all had successful discussions in your breakout groups, and I hope that it wasn't too clunky, the move in between them. From our side, at least, it looked like it worked seamlessly, so I'll take that as a positive. Jonathan, I think I am handing it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, James. I was just letting the numbers creep up that are joining us now. I hope we're up to a good, almost everybody's back. Okay, great. Thanks, James. Yeah, and likewise in our group, we had a good discussion. So then my role now is to facilitate report backs from the various breakout groups. So I think we'll just go in order. So the first group was moving from slow, low outcome cooperation to faster, better outcome cooperation and how climate change can be a catalyst. That was led by Ali. Then the reporter was Samantha. Do either of you want to offer a report back?
Hi, all. I'm happy to report back quickly. Ali, if I miss anything, please do speak up, say something. So what we looked at was how climate change events can be identified and used to improve cooperation between countries. So we looked at different examples, one of them being South Africa, specifically with the high power production and how the extreme drought there greatly affected, all different industries. And how this event in particular drove transboundary events almost outside of South Africa, as countries are using this now as a driving example, who are likely to experience drought in the future. We went on and used different examples. We looked at Latin America and the use of dams and how, although they may come with issues, that they can be useful for, holding the water, for storing it. and, you know, for better quality check, and most importantly for data management. And that's sort of where the rest of the conversation went, really focusing on data management, how it should be managed. We also discussed, you know, citizen science, civil society, and how they are great indicators for what's going on, but it's not quite yet accepted among science, but how there are actions. We had one example from Laura, which I thought was great, if you wanted to speak up and touch on it, on how they're using what's it called? They're teaching capacities, raising capacities for locals, specifically, I think she said local women, to test the water with pH kits to come back and be, for their claims to be backed by science. So yeah, it kind of went a few different places, but overall it was a very interesting conversation, and one that I was very happy to be a part of. If I missed anything, please do speak up, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Samantha.
Okay.
That was a great summary.
Okay, Ali, if you want to add anything, well, you're welcome.
No, I think she covered it well. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, good points. I think the gender issue was flagged, at least peripherally, in ours as well, by Matilda, our group. And just curious to double back, so you mentioned the drought in Southern Africa. So I'm based, or South Africa. So I'm based, or both. I'm based in South Africa, which seems like we have quite a few droughts. So which one were you referring to? Samantha?
Yes, sorry. It was from it was in the 2016 period.
The recent one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. No, sounds like a productive session, a breakout session. So it's in the interest of time, I'll keep things moving to the next group, which was the one I was in, focused on moving from cooperation over water to cooperation over shared basin investment opportunities for enhanced resilience. And that was led by Astrid with Matilda. And I guess it's Matilda that offers the report back. Do you want to take the floor, Matilda?
Of course, yes. So we mostly, as you said, we focus on how to change the cooperation that we have now, that is mostly focused on water, to a broader cooperation and to have more resilience. So Astrid first talked to us about, we had many conversations, but so we mentioned the need to really change the conversation, to go from water allocation to something more, to look at to change the position of needing water to what we actually need from the water. So the importance of changing the conversation, then we need to countries and people who share the water need to have a shared vision to integrate all the many things that are linked with the water, and also the importance of trust between neighbors, because if there is no trust, it's very hard to go forward. And also as we talked about earlier, the need to always integrate climate into water governance. And then we had an interesting example from basin Kenya and Uganda, and how the two countries made a plan together. And before signing this, they had the joint working groups, and they got everyone, all the different sectors together. So that was one way to actually get the plan to work. Like it was mentioned, agriculture, forestry, environment, all the different levels of governments. So that's how we can have a better cooperation for water governance in general. And then the plan didn't only look at the metric use of water, but it went further than that with built infrastructures, livelihood, the different uses of water. So it's really to look at the broader picture about how we use water. Then we also mentioned the importance of going from the local level to the international, to the regional level or higher levels, and we need the different visions of everyone to be aligned together, and to bring the principles that are from the local level and bring them higher. And then it was also an example of a safeguard checklist for when we develop a project, which can be very useful, because then we can have different well, the list can include technical things, gender participation, and then this can help rate our project, if project makes sense or not. So, and then we also mentioned then maybe if we could have some incentive programs or something at the international level, if there could be a clause or something that could be helpful for the different governments. And we talked a lot also about other things, but I think that's a good summary. Maybe you can add something, Jonathan, if I missed something.
Yeah, Matilda, I agree. Good summary. Yeah, I'll just reinforce the point about this balancing scale. I think it comes up a lot. I think it was in another session today where it came up, this vertical integration, bottom up, top down, all this I think was spot on. Yeah, and then exactly this promoting it at a transboundary level. I think from my side, intervention I had was I don't think I've ever seen the word nexus in a transboundary water agreement. And I think as other new concepts have come along over the years, the evolution of transboundary water law has progressively reflected or captured some of these new concepts like gender. I think you do actually find in some agreements now. But nexus, I don't know if we've made it there yet. And that may be a next step. Just doubling back, Matilda, just like that, I looked at these questions, and I was thinking myself, did we answer that one? And you probably know better than me. So the second one, are basin agencies fit for purpose when it comes to investment in transboundary river basins? Did we come up with a verdict on that one?
I don't think we did. I started a little bit, but I think we went back on our previous discussion. I think it was mentioned briefly that it's hard to bridge the gap, and then often it's mostly the ministries that are involved, but we didn't have enough time to talk about it.
Yeah, okay. We can put that one on the shelf and maybe pull it off at a future session, at a future conference. Great. Thank you very much, Matilda. Okay, looking at the next breakout group, it was focused on sustainable financing in transboundary cooperation and how climate change can be the catalyst. On that list, I see Isaac it was led by John Matthews with Isaac as an associated speaker, and then Jungsu Lee as the reporter. Jungsu, do you want to offer a report back?
Yeah, I'm very happy to report back from the session breakout room group 3. So I will be sharing some of the key points and some of the comments discussing the sustainable financing and transboundary cooperation breakout room. And also they're having a lot of interesting points to discuss the sustainable financing and transboundary cooperation, and especially how finance is critical to effective climate resilience at different levels. And everyone in the breakout group shared a reflection on the topic related to climate finance. And it was firstly mentioned that climate change it is an important catalyzer, especially in the context of the transboundary, especially as an important subject and a common shared goal that every countries and every governments and every stakeholders can agree on, and also which gives them more motivation to cooperate among these stakeholders. And also, some of the participants shared the important perspectives in focusing on West Europe. And it was also mentioned that recent intense rainfalls and damages caused due to this rainfall intensity, mostly that happened in Germany and Netherlands. And especially there was a call for common action, and also ability to forecast this climate-induced natural disasters and extreme events, and information gathering that can predict this kind of extreme events, and also the trust building between the scientists and citizens, and also between the government and civil society, and also especially engagement of more diverse stakeholders, not only the governments, but also more importantly, civil society was highlighted for the prevention. And also our participants shared experiences of focusing on the in Africa, especially it was mentioned some of the challenges when it comes to financing transboundary water development projects. And first point was weak willingness to fund the transboundary water projects. And second point, it was also mentioned that lack of sustainability of the institutional framework and hardship of such institutional arrangement was mentioned. Last but not least, it was also raised and pointed out by some of our participants that there have been some corruption issues related to the climate finance especially within the transboundary water context. So, so here, this was a quick recap of what we have discussed in the group 3. And if I missed any points, please just speak up.
Okay, sounds like a good summary. Interesting that corruption filtered into the conversation. Maybe I'll just double back to the second to last point that you discussed in terms of climate change in Africa. I think you said you're talking about institutions, and you said there were hardships with institutions. Maybe could you elaborate just a bit on that?
Yeah. So Mr. Isaac mentioned his experience with a Nile basin that he was working for before, and with regards to the sustainability of the framework and institutional arrangement, he mentioned that some of the issues came up between Kenyan and the Uganda government because they wanted to cut off the budget as they've been spending a lot of monies on this transboundary water project, and there he mentioned the hardship of such institutional arrangement between this government and in regards to these issues.
Yeah, good, excellent. So in our group as well, interestingly, this funding issue was flagged, I think, by Conrad, that you can spend all these time putting together these investment plans and this, and no doubt you can lay the groundwork to secure financing and funding. But the funding issue often creeps in, and it's in budgeting and all that stuff. I mean, it's something that maybe we need to be more explicit about going forward. Okay, cool. Let's see. So we have one more group. Thank you very much, Jung-Soo. Final group, sharing of approaches, examples of cooperation for mutual development. So involved in that group was Chris Severin, Juan Carlos Sanchez, and Aloise Aguitant. I hope I'm getting your name close to correct. Aloise, do you want to take the floor?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And don't worry, you did well enough with my name.
All right, good stuff.
So yeah, our discussion was also really fruitful, and thank you so much, Christian, for taking the lead with that. So just to recap a bit on the main points that we shared between ourselves, we found some examples of transboundary cooperation, some of which were mentioned were the Najab Basin Authority between 9 countries. And that was a moment to reinforce the need of having a common project to have effective cooperation. We also mentioned the Jordan River, the Rio Grande at the US-Mexico border, and the Nile River Basin. And we discussed the difficulty of setting up water funds and collaboration, especially with, and the particular difficulty of transboundary waters due to the multiplicity of stakeholders, to the high level of securitization of the areas, to the use of water as a weapon of war, and due to the discrepancies of powers that may take place in areas and leading to tensions. We also had an example of Juan Carlos from the field, who told us about collective action through the re-evaluation of small projects that render shared benefits to different communities, such as fisheries and tree nurseries, and this looking more at a macro perspective. And so the main key points that I think we'll be taking forward from our session were the following. We mentioned that we have an opportunity to look at transboundary basins through understanding the cultural and historical heritage of each river basins. And it was mentioned that there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and that governance really needs to be locally focused and locally led, particularly by indigenous voices, women leaders, and etc. There also needs to be a constant discussion about agreements on the priorities, and this on different levels, in which representatives of local issues are always present and taken into account seriously. We mentioned the crucial component of building trust by sharing success stories and learning from past experiences. And this comes along with data sharing and knowledge management. Finally, another big point that we mentioned was this notion of a shared vision, and not just a vision, but also a structure that has the mechanisms to implement such vision, like, for instance, a basin commission, but also dispute resolution mechanisms that can work their way down and that need to be in the form of compliance and dialogue. Altogether, this means breaking down the stratification of levels of governance, from top down to transboundary to local stakeholders. And I think this is all I had in my notes. But Christian, feel free to bring anything in if you think of something else.
I would just like to say that it was so eloquently presented. I have no idea. I could not have done it, and I will say this to all the rapporteurs. Wow, what a job! I mean, I am blown away, and I can, I'm just so happy. Thank you so much for doing such a fantastic job, all of you.
Thank you so much.
Good. Okay, Eloise, yeah, I totally agree. Great work reporting back on everything. So I just want to pick up on a couple threads, maybe as you're discussing, and since we have a few minutes here. First off, I like that you said let's aim towards implementation. I mean, that word I think came up in our group as well. This process, kind of again this preceding process to arrive at a lot of these preconditions for successful implementation, but then ultimately pushing towards implementation. Doubling back though, frankly, this challenge of effectively crossing scales is one of, in my mind, the key issues in transboundary water management. And I think you had talked about that kind of lining things up, and it emerged in your group. I just want to give you the opportunity, another minute or so, if you wanted to add anything on that front.
Sure. So on the different levels of commitments you mentioned, sorry, could you just repeat what you were asking exactly?
The scales. You were talking about, I think, local scales and the need to connect transboundary to local. Did I interpret you correctly?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think what we meant by that is that there is there needs to be a reevaluation of the different types of knowledge that's come up in transboundary water issues. And this means looking at informal methods of dealing with issues like erosion and very day-to-day struggles that can come up in such settings. And these are valuable forms of knowledge that need to be taken just as seriously as issues on the national level about the use of water as a weapon of war, for instance. There needs to be a constant, I guess, just a system-wide thinking that connects all the dots, because all of these issues are interrelated. Just like water, it flows in various ways, and it's important to recognize that it's complex and that it's not compartmentalized in such stratification of governance.
Good. Okay, thank you very much, Eloise. Okay, cool. So we're down to our last 3-4 minutes of this session. As I'm scanning between the visual and the chat box, I'm noticing the OMVS pop up there. And actually in our breakout, that occurred to me as one of the very nice examples of transboundary cooperation that also incorporates or integrates different sectors. There's flood control, there's hydroelectricity generation in Mali, and then there's flood recession agriculture as well. So a lot of different examples integrated. Okay, so let's see. Just kind of recapping some of the key takeaways from this lesson. First, from this session. First off, I right at the beginning, I must say I love some of the reactions, the lively chat box, some of the skepticism of or questioning of the numbers of transboundary basins is great to jump out. It's great to have debate. It's great to keep these numbers refined and keep updating as we go. And I saw somebody said, okay, it's not 276, it's 310. And in another couple of years, it'll probably be 320 or something as we continue to identify more. But it's great to have the lively interaction on this. Great initial presentation to kind of contextualize climate change in the context of transboundary water management. This is one kind of variable among many, and trying to marshal all these things is no doubt a big challenge. Some of the other presentations on the case studies in Africa from Siomabali Malakisi and Bupusa, really good, and I think really highlight some of the initial steps that need to be taken towards achieving climate adaptation in a transboundary watercourse. And I guess, the future will be interesting to see if that can be realized. I mean, Bupusa is closer to me here in South Africa, and I'm aware there's a large Jeff project that's going to get moving there. And so maybe next steps will be taken towards implementation. But I think that'll be interesting to see how that evolves. Other than that, again, just a lot of great points in the breakouts. I think we've just now heard from the report backs from 4 different sessions. Overall, kind of excellent points across the board. And I think we've moved from answering the questions in some cases to looking at solutions, data management, citizen science. And then looking at implementation also, I think is the final thing. Again, this acknowledging kind of a gestation period with pushing countries towards common visions and kind of supporting convergence towards a range of other key points that need to be achieved is important, but then ultimately pushing past that towards implementation. Okay, so I think we're down to our last few seconds. So on behalf of all the organizers, thank you very much for joining this session, and please enjoy the rest of the sessions that follow. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.